Mr. and Mrs. Hewlett. Not Mom. Not Dad. I saw the words hit them. I saw the distance settle in. Behind me, through the glass wall, Linda and two nurses were watching quietly. They had already figured it out. My mother moved first. She stepped toward me with her arms lifting, a sob breaking free. Irene, oh my God. Irene. I took half a step back. It was small but clear. She stopped mid-motion, her hands suspended awkwardly before slowly dropping to her sides. My father's voice came out rough and unsteady. You're a doctor. I am. You're the chief. Yes. He swallowed. But Monica said, I held his gaze. Monica said what exactly? He couldn't finish the sentence. I could almost see the past 5 years unraveling in his mind. My mother began crying harder. We thought you left school. She told us you were struggling, that you didn't want us anymore. I kept my voice steady. She told you I dropped out, that I was involved with someone who had serious problems, that I had no stable place to live, that I refused to contact you. None of it was true. The room felt still. Behind me, I saw Carla cover her mouth and one of the residents looked down at the floor. My father tried to regain control of the moment. This isn't the time for this. Your sister is in intensive care. I nodded calmly. I'm aware. I just spent 3 hours and 40 minutes making sure she would survive. He had no response. For once, there were no commands, no corrections, no dismissals. Just silence. The truth standing in front of him in a white coat was louder than any explanation I had tried to send in letters or emails. My mother steadied herself against a chair. The letters, she whispered. You said you wrote 2 emails with official documentation attached. 1 handwritten letter sent priority mail. It came back unopened. I recognized your handwriting. She pressed her hand to her mouth. My father stared at the floor. I called 14 times in 5 days, I continued evenly. I asked Aunt Ruth to speak to you. You told her to stay out of it. I wasn't raising my voice. I was simply stating facts. Facts don't need volume. At that moment, Linda stepped into the room gently. Dr. Hewlett, I'm sorry to interrupt. The board chair reviewed the overnight trauma log. The Physician of the Year committee asked me to pass along their congratulations on tonight's outcome. She said it casually, unaware of what she had just added to the moment. My mother looked at me through swollen eyes. Physician of the Year? It's an internal recognition, I replied quietly. Nothing more. I thanked Linda and excused myself, saying I needed to check postoperative vitals. As I walked toward the ICU hallway, I heard my mother's voice behind me, fragile and shaken. Jerry, what have we done? And my father, for the first time in my life, had no answer. 4 hours later, I entered ICU room 6 for a routine follow-up. The monitors beeped steadily, morning light slipping through the blinds. Monica's eyes were open, unfocused but aware. She blinked slowly, scanning the room, then her gaze settled on me. She squinted at my badge, read it once, then again. The color drained from her face. Her lips parted slightly. Irene. My voice was calm and steady. Good morning, Monica. I'm your attending surgeon. You suffered a ruptured spleen and a grade 3 liver laceration in the accident. The surgery was successful and you are expected to recover fully. I didn't ask her a question. I didn't need to. I was the chief of this department, a position I had held for 2 years. I watched her react in the same emotional stages I had seen in our father, only slower, softened by pain medication and the shock of survival. First came confusion, then disbelief, then fear. And finally, that familiar look I had seen throughout my life. The quick, calculating glance behind the eyes, like she was already planning her next story. Even in a hospital bed, with surgical sutures holding her liver together, Monica was thinking about how to explain herself. Irene, listen. I can explain, she said weakly. I shook my head. You don't need to explain anything to me. I pointed toward the glass hallway where my parents were standing, their faces tired and red from crying. You need to explain everything to them. I finished updating her chart, checked the drainage line, and left the room without another word. I did not stay to hear what happened next, but the ICU floor was quiet enough that the argument carried through the corridor. The room doors were not soundproof and neither was the truth. Now let me pause and ask you something. What do you think Monica told my parents when they entered that ICU room? Did she finally admit the truth? Did she reinforce the old story? Or did she shift into victim mode again? If you're watching closely, you probably guessed correctly. If you chose the third option, you understand my sister well. The moment my parents walked in, Monica began crying loudly, deep, painful sobs that made the heart monitor rise slightly because of the strain on her body. Mom, Dad, you have to believe me. I never wanted things to go this far. I was afraid for her. My father stood at the end of the bed, struggling to keep his voice controlled. Monica, Irene is a surgeon. She is the chief trauma surgeon at this hospital. I didn't know that, Monica said quickly. She added that she had sent letters and emails, that she had tried to contact me, and that I was the one who ignored her. My mother's voice sounded empty when she asked, "Is that true?" Monica replied, "She's exaggerating. You know how Ruth is." My father spoke again, and this time his voice broke, not from anger but from watching the life he believed in collapse slowly. 2 years ago, Ruth told us Irene was in residency becoming a surgeon. You said Ruth was lying and just wanted to create drama. Monica answered, "Ruth doesn't know the full story." "Then tell us the full story," my mother shouted in the ICU, making a nurse outside the room turn her head. 2 rooms down, a visitor looked up from their phone. Monica backed slightly against the bed rail, surrounded by 4 lines and my surgical work, and switched from defense to offense. "Fine. She's a doctor. Good for her. But she abandoned this family." My father's hand tightened on the bed frame. "She didn't call because we blocked her number, Monica. Because you told us to," he said quietly. The monitor continued beeping steadily. The 4 drip continued. And for perhaps the first time in her life, Monica had no prepared response. Aunt Ruth arrived in the ICU at 9:45 a.m. I had called her from the scrub room after surgery, not as a tactic but because Monica was her niece too and Ruth deserved to know the truth. Ruth walked in without sitting or hugging anyone. She stood in the center of the room and said, "I have been waiting 5 years to have this conversation, and I'm not waiting another minute." Then she took out her phone and opened a folder she had carefully labeled that I later discovered that Ruth had gathered strong proof of everything I had tried to send my parents. There were screenshots of every email I sent during those first desperate days, the PDF of my official leave of absence from Oregon Health and Science University bearing the dean's signature and university seal, my re-enrollment confirmation, and a photograph from my residency graduation showing me holding my diploma while wearing a cap and gown, with Aunt Ruth standing beside me, the only family member in the picture. Ruth handed the phone to my mother, whose hands were shaking as she scrolled. Then Ruth opened a text message thread and read aloud a message Monica had sent her 4 years earlier. "Don't tell Mom and Dad about Irene's residency. It will just confuse them. They're finally at peace." The room became very quiet. Monica stared upward at the ceiling, her jaw tight, but the old calculating look was gone from her eyes. Instead, there was something different, like someone who had exhausted every possible excuse. Ruth looked directly at her and said, "You asked me to stay silent for the family's peace. But this family never had peace. It lived under a 5-year blackout." Then Ruth turned to my parents and said, "You didn't lose Irene because you didn't love her. You lost her because loving Monica was easier." No one argued because there was nothing left to defend. My mother sat heavily in the chair beside Monica's bed, not looking at her daughter, but reading my emails one by one on the phone screen. Her lips moved quietly as she read. She stopped at the final email I sent the night before my residency graduation. I know that message by heart because I have read it many times in my own private archive. It said, "Mom, I don't know if you will read this. I graduated from residency today. I wish you were here. I'm still your daughter. I never stopped being your daughter." My mother bent forward in the chair, not crying but overwhelmed by the realization that some mistakes cannot be undone. My father stood facing the hospital window with his back to the room, shoulders trembling. Aunt Ruth later told me she had never seen her older brother cry in his 62 years of life. Not at family funerals, not during business struggles, never before. But that day he cried silently while staring at the parking lot, while the monitor continued its steady beeping behind him. Monica lay motionless in the bed, silent, eyes fixed on the ceiling. The performance was over. There was no audience left to convince. The life she had built through deception over 35 years was breaking apart, and no amount of charm, tears, or justification could repair it. Ruth spoke again very softly. "Jerry, you missed her wedding. Nathan's father walked her down the aisle. Do you understand what that means?" Dad did not turn from the window. His voice came out broken. What have we done? It wasn't really a question. It was an admission. Knowing the truth is not the same as knowing how to live with it. I returned to the hospital that afternoon after a 22-hour shift. My parents were still there, because where else would they go after 5 years of pretending they only had one daughter? My mother stood immediately when I entered, her face swollen from crying. Irene, baby, I am so sorry. I am so. I raised my hand gently to stop her. I understand that you are sorry. But sorry is just a beginning. What I need now is time. My father turned from the window. He looked older, exhausted, as if the weight of the past years had settled onto him at once. We want to fix this, he said. I kept my voice steady and clear. Then you must understand something first. I am not the girl you sent away. I am not the girl who begged you to listen from 3,000 miles away for 5 days. I am someone who built a complete life without you. And if you want to be part of my life again, it will be on my terms, not Monica's and not yours. It will be my choice. My father opened his mouth out of habit as if ready to argue, but then closed it and gave a small, broken nod instead. I looked at Monica lying on the bed. Her eyes were open and watching me. When you are fully recovered, I said quietly, you and I will talk. Not today. Today you are my patient. I don't mix family and medicine. Then I left the room with my back straight and my steps controlled. I did not look behind me. I was not closing the door forever, but I would decide when it opened how wide and who could walk through it. 2 weeks later, Monica was discharged from the hospital. Her surgical wound was healing physically, though emotionally things were still unresolved. I chose where we would meet. A small coffee shop in Middletown, halfway between her apartment and my home, a neutral place. Nathan came with me but sat at a different table near the window, pretending to read legal documents. He wasn't really pretending. Monica entered looking drained, thinner after surgery and loss of appetite. The confident attitude she always carried was gone. For the first time I could remember, my older sister looked exactly her real age. She sat down slowly, wrapped her hands around a cup of coffee she did not drink, and stared at the table. I skipped small talk. I'm not going to yell at you. I'm not going to list every lie you told. You already know what you did. What I want to understand is why. The silence stretched long enough that a barista's voice calling a customer's name echoed across the room. Then Monica spoke. Because you were going to become everything I wasn't, and I couldn't handle that. I let the words settle. That is the first honest thing you have said to me in 10 years. Her eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry, Irene. I know, I said. But sorry cannot return the years I lost. Sorry cannot bring my parents to my wedding. Sorry cannot undo the box Mom mailed back to me when my graduation items were returned like I was already gone. She looked away and I could see real tears this time. I learned the difference between performance and truth. Then she admitted something else that surprised me. She said she had tried calling my medical school twice, attempting to get my leave of absence revoked by claiming my caregiver documents were fake. I stayed silent. Dean didn't listen to you, I said finally. He protected the truth. Not me, I added. The truth. I leaned back and took a slow breath. The plan I had discussed with Nathan the night before came back to my mind like a closing argument in court. I am not cutting you out of my life, I said. But there are conditions. Monica nodded quietly. You will tell the complete truth to every family member you lied to. Every aunt, uncle, and cousin who believed I was homeless or in rehabilitation. He swallowed. You will correct every story. Another pause. And you will do it in writing. An email to the entire family group. All 47 people. Aunt Ruth will confirm that everyone receives it. She nodded again. I met with my parents separately the following week. Nathan drove me to their house. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where my acceptance letter had once been read, and where my sister had smiled with her mouth but not her eyes. I told them I was open to rebuilding trust, but they needed to attend family counseling together. Not for my sake, but to understand why they had believed a false story about their own daughter without ever verifying the truth. My father's jaw tightened. We don't do counseling in this family. That is exactly why we are here, I replied. My mother placed a gentle hand on his arm. He looked at her, then at me, and something inside him seemed to break. Not loudly but slowly, like a crack forming in glass. Finally he said, Fine. I stood up to leave, then turned once more. Nathan's father walked me down the aisle, I said. That happened. We cannot change it. If you want a future where you can know your grandchildren, start building it now. Not with dramatic gestures, but with steady, reliable action. Words of apology fade with time, but healthy boundaries last. That is the real difference between emotional promises and real change. 1 month later, I attended the Physician of the Year Gala at the Hartford Marquis Hotel. About 200 people filled the ballroom. Surgeons, hospital leaders, donors, and staff. Crystal glasses clinked softly, name tags hung from suits and dresses, and a classical string quartet played in the background, though few people were truly listening. I wore a simple black dress. Nathan sat at the front table looking perfectly comfortable in formal wear. Beside him, Dr. Maggie Thornton sat with her arms folded and a small, knowing smile. The kind of smile she keeps when she has carefully planned something for a long time. The Master of Ceremonies stepped to the podium and announced this year's Physician of the Year. A surgeon whose skill, composure under pressure, and dedication to patients had raised the standard of care at the hospital. Dr. Irene Ulett, Chief of Trauma Surgery. Applause filled the room, followed by a standing ovation from many of my surgical colleagues. I walked to the stage, placed my hands on the podium, and spoke briefly. 5 years ago, I nearly left medicine. Not because I lacked ability, but because I lost the people I believed I needed. I paused. What I learned is that the people who truly matter are not always the ones you are born into. Sometimes they are the people who choose you back. I looked at Maggie, at Nathan, and at my team sitting in the third row. Then I turned my gaze toward the very back of the ballroom, where Ruth had quietly reserved 2 seats. My parents were sitting there. My mother wore a navy dress she had likely bought recently. My father wore a tie he seemed uncomfortable in. They sat quietly with hands resting in their laps, watching me with expressions that mixed sadness, regret, and something like pride. Sometimes, I continued, the people you are born to eventually find their way back, even if it takes time. I saw my mother press a hand over her mouth. My father stood briefly, then sat again as applause filled the room. After the event, my father approached Nathan near the coat check area. He stood silently for a long moment before speaking. I owe you an apology. I should have been many things I wasn't. Nathan shook his hand and replied politely, with respect, sir, you should have been many things. But we are here now. They did not release each other's hands immediately. My father's eyes were red. Monica sent her email on a Wednesday night, and Ruth confirmed that it reached all 47 family members. I read it the next morning while Nathan placed coffee beside my laptop without saying anything. The message was simple and direct. Monica admitted she had lied about my education, created false evidence, and maintained the deception for 5 years. She confessed that she had prevented my parents from learning the truth and ended with the statement that I had never abandoned the family, and that she alone was responsible for the lie. The reactions came slowly. Uncle Pete's wife called Ruth crying because she had repeated Monica's story at a book club 2 years earlier. Cousin David from Vermont replied with a short message saying he no longer knew who Monica was. Our grandmother, Nana June, aged 89, called me directly, her voice thin but firm with anger. I have never been lied to so completely by my own family, she said. I am sorry I failed to see it earlier. I told her there was nothing to forgive because she had been deceived like everyone else. No one organized a campaign against Monica. There was no public rejection or group punishment. But the trust she had carefully built and controlled for decades simply disappeared. You could feel it in the quiet after the email, in the lack of replies, and in the way invitations and conversations slowly stopped coming. No one sought revenge against Monica. But the world around her had changed. They simply stopped believing her. For someone who built her identity around being trusted, that loss of belief was punishment enough. My parents began therapy in February with a counselor in West Hartford named Dr. Rena, a calm and straightforward woman who never allowed avoidance. My mother embraced the process quickly. She had been carrying her guilt and passivity like a heavy stone in her pocket. When Dr. Rena first named it, silent enabling, my mother broke down in the session and cried for about 40 minutes without stopping. That was what Ruth told me later because I was not present. It was not my session to witness. My father found therapy harder. He attended, sat quietly, and answered questions with very few words. According to Ruth, Dr. Rena pointed out that his need to be correct and his tendency to refuse reconsidering decisions once made had become the foundation of the family's conflict. Monica provided the lie, but my father's pride allowed it to harden into certainty. He did not argue with the therapist, and that was probably the first small sign of change. 3 weeks after starting therapy, my mother sent me a handwritten letter. The irony of receiving a handwritten letter was not lost on either of us. In it she wrote, "I failed you. Not only when I believed Monica, but every time I chose keeping peace over seeking fairness. Every time I allowed your father's anger to decide what was true. Every time I saw you standing quietly in the doorway waiting and told myself you were fine because admitting my fear was harder than fighting for you. I read the letter at my kitchen table with Hippo asleep at my feet and Nathan in the other room giving me privacy while still staying close. I did not cry, but I held the letter for a long time. Then I placed it in the drawer where I keep meaningful things. Sarah's card, the returned letters, and the unopened wedding invitation that had been sent back. And I put the new letter inside as well. Progress does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it is simply deciding where to place what you carry. Monica also began therapy, though separately from the family sessions. I learned this from Ruth and from Monica herself, who mentioned it awkwardly during our third coffee meeting. We have met 3 times now. Each meeting has been shorter, more careful, and slightly more honest than the one before. During our first meeting she said very little. During the second she told me about starting therapy. During the third she said something more meaningful. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't know if I deserve it. But I want you to know I am trying not to be that person anymore. I took a slow sip of coffee and replied, "Show me." Words in this family have never been difficult. Actions take time. She nodded without pushing or performing. That felt new. Do I trust her completely? I honestly do not know. I have spent years learning to read her behavior, and I am still unsure where her performance ends and her genuine self begins. Maybe she is unsure too. Perhaps that is what therapy is helping her discover. But I believe change is possible. That is all I can offer right now. She still carries the surgical scar on her body, a 7-centimeter mark on the left upper abdomen, gradually fading from red to white over time. Every time she dresses or sees her reflection, she will remember the injury left by the sister she tried to erase. The sister who, when it mattered most, chose professional duty and compassion over anger. In return, I carry the emotional weight of those 5 silent years in my memory, resting somewhere between my ribs. In a strange and painful way it feels like balance. Perhaps with enough honest, ordinary, consistent time we might reach something new, not perfect but real. I am sitting in my office at Mercy Crest Hospital tonight. The hallway outside is quiet in that special way hospitals become after visiting hours end and before the night shift becomes busy. My nameplate is on the door. My diplomas hang on the wall not because I need to see them but because the residents who train under me see them. On my desk sits a framed wedding photograph. Nathan, Dr. Thornton, Aunt Ruth, and 30 guests standing in a backyard filled with October sunlight. My parents are not in the picture, but their absence sits quietly on the bookshelf beside it. A new photo was taken 3 weeks ago. In it, my mother and father stand on my front porch wearing winter coats, looking slightly unsure of themselves, like visitors trying to remember how they belong somewhere. Dad keeps his hands inside his pockets. Mom smiles halfway, nervous, careful, trying a little too hard but still trying. It isn't a perfect picture. It's awkward in a quiet human way. And that is what makes it real. If you are listening to my story and feel connected to it, whether you were the one silenced or the one who once stayed silent, I want you to remember something. Truth does not disappear with time. It doesn't matter whether it takes 5 days or 5 years. Truth has a patient habit of arriving exactly when it is meant to. You cannot hurry it and you cannot escape it either. I did not seek revenge against my sister. I realized I did not need revenge. I became someone who could live without it, and that turned out to be the most powerful response. Not anger, not revenge, just building a life that belonged entirely to me. If you are waiting for your family to finally see you, start by seeing yourself first. Build the life you deserve with people who are willing to show up consistently. When others eventually turn back toward you, let them find a door that you control. You decide when it opens,